attention to the front window. A police car was pulling into our driveway. My parents immediately stood up as if they'd been expecting it, and they rushed me to my room, telling me they'd call me if needed. I wanted answers, but I knew it wasn't time to push, so I went back to my room, curiosity eating away at me. Not even 2 minutes later, I was called back upstairs. This time, they didn't keep me in the dark. My dad explained that about 15 to 20 minutes earlier, during the windstorm, he had stepped into the backyard to make sure nothing had been blown over before going to bed. While scanning the yard, he noticed the light from my bedroom window illuminating something near it. As his eye adjusted, he realized it was a man standing motionless just outside my window, staring in. My dad yelled at him and started moving toward him, but the man immediately turned and ran. He jumped the back fence effortlessly, as if he'd done it 100 times before, and he disappeared into the neighboring yards. In that moment, everything I had feared for years stopped being a possibility and became a fact. I hadn't imagined it. Someone really had been there. Terrified, my parents called the police right away, and then went to knock on the neighbor's door to warn her. The older woman who lived there didn't open the door. Instead, she yelled at them to leave or she would call the cops herself. The police eventually arrived, but since my dad hadn't gotten a clear look at the man, there wasn't much they could do beyond increasing patrols in the area and recommending we install more cameras, which we did. In retrospect, my back neighbor's reaction still feels deeply suspicious to me. Why was her first response to threaten my parents when all they did was knock on her door to warn her? It raises a couple questions, such as, was she living with that man my dad saw? Or had she seen him too and genuinely thought it was him knocking? Did I know the person who stood outside my window for years, or was it just some creepy neighbor who noticed a teenage girl's room with poorly covered blinds and took advantage of it? Did he only want to watch, or was he working up to something else? Even now, those questions haunt me. Knowing that someone was really there the entire time makes every sound I brushed off, every breath I thought I imagined, and every silhouette I forced myself not to look at, feels so much more terrifying. I've since switched rooms and can't look at windows facing our backyard the same way anymore. Thank God mine now faces the street. What scares me the most isn't that it happened. It's how long it went on for, without anyone knowing, and how easily it could have continued. It's how long it went on for, without anyone knowing, and how easily it could have continued.
Anonymous. Dun, dun, dun.
It was a cold winter day in mid-December, and I was 15 years old. I originally lived in a suburban area of Alberta with my parents in our apartment. However, we were running low on space, and with my little sister on her way, we knew we had to move to a bigger house. It seemed lucky for us at first, because there was a house just a few blocks down that was selling for a very cheap price tag. Granted, it wasn't the best looking or in the best area, but it had room to grow in, and for the price we paid, we could renovate to our heart's content. My dad did renovate slightly with the money we had left, but mainly the basement as it was almost unusable without being fixed up. Cleaning, carpeting, new beams, fixing the bathroom, and fresh wallpaper with a cool pattern I got to choose myself. For the first couple of months, living there had been great, and I was really enjoying the new house. Until the first questionable moment came along. It was my father's birthday, and to celebrate, we all had gone to a restaurant in the evening. It went well until we came home to our front door wide open. My mom was absolutely shaken, and we begged my dad to drive us away from the house while she called the police. My dad grabbed a large, heavy wrench from his toolbox in the truck and went into the house to search for the intruder. My mom and I called the cops anyway, and we sat there for 5 excruciatingly long minutes before they arrived. They searched the house and found my dad, and he came back out and told
Listen
us
to the
nothing was
story.
actually
Shut the
stolen,
fuck up.
and no one was in the house either. However, some of our items were moved or knocked over, specifically the books on my bookshelf. The police eventually finished their search and told us the same thing. We were still a little paranoid, but finally, we went inside our home. From that day forward, I would always hear strange noises coming from the walls, and sometimes underneath our basement. Might I add, my room was there, in the basement, but I always dismissed the sounds as the pipes. This was an older house after all. That was until one night something unexplainable happened. It was around 2 in the morning, and I was playing with my Nintendo DS under the sheets with no volume so my parents didn't know I was still awake. That's when I heard it. Clear laughter coming from the wall to the side of my bed. My heart froze in time, and my eyes probably widened to the size of plates. I didn't know what I should do. Ignore it? Call my parents? Go investigate? I decided to wait for a while to see if it happened again. But after about 30 minutes of laying still as a stone, I decided it must have just been my sleep-deprived imagination, and finally went to sleep. I woke up the next morning in my bed. As usual, nothing changed. Despite that laugh still burning in my mind, I tried to pass it off. I would still hear the same strange noises every so often for the next couple of weeks, but that felt normal for me now. This is when the next occurrence happens. By this time, my sister was already born, since the basement was big enough. Plus, my mom trusted me with keeping her safe at night.
Mr. Nightmare
shared
is
the room
telling a
with me.
story, and I think you guys
Now,
can
this
hear it.
doesn't mean my mom didn't use baby monitors, because she did. She kept the parent units in the living room,
Can you hear it?
and the other in the kitchen. One night, my parents had gone out for a late-night dinner and left me to take care of the house until they got back. I was in the living room watching a movie when I got up to get a snack from the kitchen. That's when I noticed odd noises coming from the baby monitor. And my heart sank. I knew no one else was home, but those were footsteps. Loud, heavy footsteps. Suddenly, my fear was realized when my sister started crying, and I heard a faint shh
He's talking about new
sound
house
come out of
stories,
the
horror
speaker,
stories
followed by a crash.
from people that
I instantly
send
did
them
the
into
first thing
him,
that came to mind,
and
which
he
now,
reads them.
thinking clearly in retrospect,
That's what I'm
could have
thinking
gotten
out,
us
unless
both
it's the first
killed.
time watching this.
I ran as quickly as I could
This
up
is
to
the
my
third
parents'
one.
room and grabbed my father's rifle.
New
However,
house horror
I didn't have
stories
the key
of
to
what really
unlock the
happened
trigger
to them
lock
when
or
they
any of
bought a
the
house.
ammunition. I figured I would pretend it was loaded and try to hide the lock with my hand. If I was attacked, I would use the buttstock to defend myself. All I thought of was getting my sister to safety. When I got to the basement door, I opened it quietly and walked down the steps, turning to face my sister's
Can you
crib.
hear it?
No one was there, but she was still crying, as well as the baby monitor being on the ground sideways. I mustered all the courage I could and yelled, "I'm armed. Come out before I find you." Still nothing. I grabbed my sister and ran upstairs. I closed the basement door and pushed a chair under the handle to keep it locked while I called my parents. They called the police and got home as fast as they could. The police got to my house before my parents did, so they made me sit in the back of the cop car with my baby sister, while one of the police officers went inside to investigate.
When your teen joins TikTok, they're protected with over
I've heard
50
this on
preset
YouTube, so
safety and
there's
privacy settings. Because when safety comes first, discovery can
ads.
follow. Hey, even
I'm
dads
not
need
sure if I
dad
can
advice
show you it. I
sometimes.
mean, they're not really showing anything. Just
The Wisconsin Fish Fry
random
is
pictures
meant to
here
be
and there.
shared, and we'd love to share it with you at Culver's.
Investigate. When my parents arrived, I told them everything that happened. They were confused but very concerned. They knew I wasn't the type of kid that would lie about something like this. The police officer came out and gave us an all clear and said no one was in the house. Just as they finished talking to us and were about to leave, I worriedly asked them if they checked behind the bookshelf. In my room, there was a bookshelf that came embedded into the wall, so I was very confused when my dad asked to look behind it. The police officer was confused too, and asked my father to
That's
come
what I'm
inside with
watching.
him and point out what he meant. Lo and behold, when we got downstairs, my bookshelf was pushed open slightly like a door. The basement window that leads to the backyard was opened all the way, with my desk chair planted under it. Behind the bookshelf was a small room with some of the pipes to our house, and the pipes wrapped around some of the walls.
Yes, I do.
On the ground were some food wrappers, one of our cups that had gone missing, lotion, a switchblade, along with an
I do.
apple that was partially eaten but still slightly fresh. Someone had been living in our house, and we didn't even know it this whole time. The police said that most likely while they were outside talking to us, whoever was here escaped through the open window. They said to call if we ever noticed anything suspicious. However, they didn't think the person would come back now that we knew of their secret. That wasn't even the most horrifying part, however. Days later, I pushed open the bookshelf myself and explored it top to bottom. That's when I found a tiny hole in the wall. And when I looked through, it pointed directly to my bed and dresser. Whoever was in there was watching me sleep, get dressed, play my video games, do my homework, speak on the phone, everything. They knew most of my life. I'm an adult now, and I live in my own apartment with my boyfriend. My parents still live there 5 years later. To this day, I worry for them, and hope whoever that was never returns.
3 scary. Oh, babysitting horror stories. That's what we're gonna listen to next.
I'm 29 now, and I've had a lot of horrific experiences, but nothing sits in my brain the way one night from when I was 15 does. It was my first real babysitting job that wasn't just watching a cousin for an hour while my aunt ran to the store. This was a family friend, the kind where your parents know their parents, and everyone assumes it's basically safe by default. They're cool with me telling this story online, so their names are Mark and Diane, and their son Charlie was 5. They lived in a nice house in a quiet, normal neighborhood. Looking back, that's part of why it messed with me. It didn't feel like the kind of house where anything bad could happen. It felt like a normal place, like where I grew up. It was a Friday night in early fall. My parents dropped me off around 6:30, and Mark and Diane were already dressed up. Mark shook my hand like I was applying for a job at his office, and Diane kept calling me a lifesaver. Mark and Diane went over the basics, like when we eat, what we eat, when his light's out, and keeping his door cracked open. If he has to use the bathroom, walk him there, because he sometimes gets scared in the hallway at night. Mark also pointed out the locks. There was a front door lock they never used because they came in through the garage. The back door, though, was the one I'd use if I needed to step out onto the deck. He mentioned I'd have to lock both the locks, and he pointed to the deadbolt up top and the regular doorbell lock underneath. I nodded like I understood. I thought it was obvious. I thought a lock was a lock. They left around 7. As soon as their car pulled away, Charlie asked if we could play board games and hide and seek. And the hide and seek I tried to talk him out of because the house was bigger than I expected, and I didn't want him hiding somewhere stupid and getting hurt. We compromised by playing a simple card matching game at the coffee table, then a video game on the little console in the family room. It was one of those kids' games where you basically just run around collecting stuff and the character can't really die. Around 7:45, I heated up the food Diana had left. It was mac and cheese and chicken nuggets, basically babysitter cheat code. Charlie ate in front of the TV, which his parents probably didn't normally let him do, but I wasn't trying to be the strict babysitter on my first paid job.
It's a beat. Throw some stank on it. Make it nasty.
Paid job. After dinner, we brushed his teeth and went to his room. His room was on the 2nd floor. The house had this wide hallway that ran past a couple bedrooms and a bathroom.
Not
Charlie's
yet.
room was at the end, and it had a small closet with sliding doors. Inside, from what I could tell earlier when he grabbed a toy, it was mostly little kid clothes and some storage bins on the top shelf. His room had a hamper in the corner by his dresser, one of those tall ones with a lid. There was a nightlight on his dresser that glowed soft yellow. I tucked him in and read him a short book, and as I was walking out, he asked if I'd stay in the hallway for a minute. I stood outside his door and listened to him rustle around for maybe 30 seconds. Then his voice went quiet, and I figured he was settled. I left his door cracked like they said. Diane had showed me the guest bedroom where I could hang out once Charlie was asleep. It was down the hallway from Charlie's room, closer to the stairs. It had a small TV, like a spare room TV, and a bed with a comforter that looked like it was never used. I turned the TV on and flipped through the channels until I found some random show. I lay on top of the bed, shoes off, phone in my pocket. It It felt like the job was basically done, but that lasted maybe 40 minutes. I was half watching the TV when I heard soft footsteps in the hallway. I looked up, and Charlie was standing in the doorway of the guest room. He was rubbing his eyes and holding his stuffed animal. His face didn't look sleepy, though. He looked scared. I asked what was wrong. He didn't come in at first. He just whispered, "Chris." I motioned him over, and he walked in slowly, like he didn't want to turn his back to the hallway. He said he heard something in his closet. I tried to assure him it was likely a house settling noise, that houses creak a lot. He shook his head fast, saying no, it was more like a scratch. I still knew it had to just be typical toddler imagination. I told him there were no monsters in his closet and asked if he wanted me to check. He nodded, and I walked him back to his room. I turned his light on fully and looked at the closet. The sliding doors were closed. I slid one open and peeked inside. Admittedly, I took just a quick peek because I knew no one was in there, and I just saw a bunch of clothes. I even pushed some clothes aside like I was actually searching. I slid the door closed and saw relief on his face. I tucked him back in and went back to the guest room, but 15 minutes later, I heard footsteps again. This time Charlie came in quicker, and he was more upset. He said, "Chris, the closet door moved." I sat up and tried not to show annoyance, even though I felt it for a second. I tried to stay patient. I said, "Okay, let's go check." We walked back down the hallway, and when we got to his room, I stopped in the doorway. The closet door was fully open. One of the sliding panels was pushed all the way to the side. I stared at it for a second, and I remember my stomach doing this little drop. Not because I thought someone was in there right away, but the way he swore he didn't. It didn't come across like he was lying. I walked over and slid the closet door shut, but the thing is, the way it closed, it didn't feel like it could have drifted open on its own. I gave Charlie a look meant to imply that I knew he was playing around with the door, maybe trying to scare me. I tucked him back in and told him he was fine and to go to sleep. I left the room, and on the way back to the guest bedroom, I caught myself listening for sounds behind me, like someone was walking in the hallway. I told myself to stop being stupid. I was 15 in a family friend's house on a safe street. About 10 minutes later, instead of footsteps, I heard Charlie call out. It wasn't a scream, but rather a shaky, raised voice like he was trying not to yell but needed me. It came from his room. I got up and walked out. As I got closer, I could hear him crying softly. I stepped into his room and saw him sitting in bed with tears on his face. I immediately looked at the closet. The door was closed. That should have been reassuring, but it wasn't. I said, "Hey buddy, what happened?" He didn't answer right away. He just lifted his arm and pointed toward the corner of the room. I followed where he was pointing, and for a second, my brain didn't process what I was seeing. There was a hamper in that corner, and behind it, pressed into the narrow space between the hamper and the wall, was a person crouched down. They were hiding, trying to make themselves as small as possible. The first thing I saw was a shoulder, then the shoes, then his partially hidden face, but I could see his eyes looking straight at me. The whole thing lasted maybe 2 seconds before my body reacted. I didn't scream. I simply decided it was time to move, so I grabbed Charlie with both arms, yanked him out of bed, and picked him up like he weighed nothing. I backed toward the door, never taking my eyes off that corner. The person surprisingly didn't move at first. They stayed crouched, as if they stayed still enough we'd forget he was there. I ran us toward the guest room and locked the door. I did my best to keep Charlie quiet as I called 911. I told the operator there was someone in the house. I gave the address and said I was babysitting, and there was a man in the kid's room. The operator asked if the intruder had a weapon. I said I didn't know. She asked if we were safe. I said we were locked in a bedroom upstairs. She told me to stay on the line. I kept expecting the doorknob to start turning or expecting the door to shake. The operator kept talking to me to keep me calm, asking me to describe the person, but I couldn't. All I could say was I saw the person's eyes hidden behind a hamper. The eventual sound of distant sirens getting closer was the first time I was ever relieved to hear police sirens in my life. The operator told me to wait until an officer came to my door and identified themselves. When the police finally came upstairs, one of them knocked and said, "Chris?" because I guess dispatch had my name. I unlocked the door and opened it, and two officers were there with flashlights. They looked past me into the room, then at Charlie. They had already done a sweep downstairs and didn't see anyone. They didn't have to kick the door down because the front door was wide open. They checked every possible hiding spot in the house. Whoever it was had left. They said based on the timeline, he probably slipped out fast when I ran, went down the stairs, and ran out the front door. When Mark and Diane got home, they arrived to the police cars outside and officers in their living room. A lot of emotions filled the room for sure. Mark asked me questions I couldn't really answer, just like the police did. The cop asked about the locks and entry points. Mark immediately went to the back door and checked it. I followed because I felt like I needed to see. The deadbolt at the top was unlocked. Mark looked at me and asked, "Did you lock both locks like I said?" I said, "I locked the bottom one." He said the bottom one pops if the knob gets jiggled. That's why he told me both. He wasn't raising his voice, but I knew he was upset. However, he didn't stay upset for long and was grateful I saved Charlie from danger. The worst part is thinking about what would have happened if Charlie hadn't come to get me, if he'd stayed in his room trying to be brave while that person was in there, or if I'd been downstairs messing around on my phone, not paying attention, or if I told Charlie to go back to bed without checking. So to parents or babysitters or anyone out there who takes care of kids, don't always dismiss the things they say as just their imagination.
Foreign aid is not the solution to poverty in Africa.
We're
It's one of the reasons why Africa is.
Don't always dismiss the things they say as just their imagination.
It's a long conversation.
I go around. No, further listening to the story.
It's political, not.
The third time I babysat AJ was the only time I was ever asked to stay overnight at someone else's house, and it's also the last time I ever babysat for anyone at all. I was 17, a senior in high school, and I had already watched AJ twice before.
Ready?
He was 8, quiet, and the kind of kid who didn't really look at you when you talked to him. The first time I met his mom, she told me he was a loner and mostly kept to himself, so I shouldn't expect much interaction. She said that like it was a good thing, like it meant the job would be easy. And honestly, the first 2 times kind of were.
Come here,
I barely had to do
Pepe.
anything besides heat up food and remind him when it was time to get ready for bed. He'd just sit in his room playing video games like Grand Theft Auto for hours. The third time was different because his mom asked if I could spend the night.
Owen.
She said she had to be out of town for work and wouldn't be back until late the next morning. She sounded stressed on the phone, like she didn't have many options, so I said yes. I figured it would be the same as before, just longer and more money. When I got to the house that afternoon, she rushed through the instructions of the kitchen counter while AJ was already upstairs. She said there was frozen pizza in the freezer, and he usually fed himself breakfast cereal, and I could sleep in the extra room at the end of the hallway. She thanked me like 3 times before she even left. When she did, I called up the stairs to let AJ know I was there, even though he already knew, and he just yelled back a short "yeah" without coming down. For the next few hours, I barely saw him. I could hear the video games through the ceiling, the sounds of gunshots and cars crashing in his game. At one point, I went upstairs to check on him and found him sitting on the floor of his room, controller in hand, eyes locked on the screen. He didn't look away when I asked if he was okay. He just nodded while staring at the TV. I went back downstairs and tried to watch something in the living room, but it felt weird being in someone else's house overnight. Around 7, I made the pizza and called AJ down. When he came down, he didn't say hi or anything. He just grabbed 2 slices, looked at me with this expression I still can't fully describe, like I'd done something to annoy him just by existing, and then went back upstairs without a word. He was acting unfriendlier than usual this time. I stood there in the kitchen holding my own plate, feeling awkward and kind of unwelcome in a house I was supposed to be in charge of for the night. I figured he was just a weird kid and didn't take it personally. After I cleaned up, I went upstairs to get ready for bed. The guest room was basic and small. I left the door half open because I didn't like the idea of being fully closed in. I was sitting on the bed talking to my friend Bree when I got this strange feeling like I was being watched. I looked up and saw AJ's head slowly move back out of view from the crack in the doorway. He had just been standing there looking in. I laughed a little because it startled me more than anything, and I called out to him, asking what he was doing. He didn't answer. I heard soft footsteps go down the hallway toward his room. I remember thinking it was kind of funny, like he was just being a nosy kid, and I didn't think much of it after that. Around 11, I put my phone down and turned off the lamp. I rolled onto my side and closed my eyes, trying to fall asleep. I don't know how much time passed before I felt like I wasn't alone in the room. I opened my eyes and saw a
Hold on. Aaron, he's really hot in the forehead. It feels like he has somewhat of a fever. So I'm gonna take him to Dr. Ryan. I'm gonna probably make an appointment for him next week so I can take him. I don't know, it probably is his stomach. Okay. And no, I'm not gonna. Back to the story.
dark shape at the foot of the bed. It took a few seconds for me to process that it was someone standing there. I let out a scream before I could stop myself and scrambled for the lamp. When I turned it on, I saw AJ standing at the end of the bed, completely still. The look on his face is still hard to describe. He looked annoyed, yet also scared or regretful of what he was about to do. Both of his hands were behind his back. I sat up and asked him what he was doing in there. He didn't answer. I told him to show me what he had behind his back. He shook his head no, still not breaking eye contact. That scared me more than if he yelled or cried. I got out of bed and moved toward him, telling him he needed to go back to his room. When I reached him, I grabbed his arm and turned him slightly, and that's when I saw the handle of a large kitchen knife in his hand. That's when I screamed again and covered my mouth with my hand without even meaning to. I yelled at him to get out of the room, to go, to leave. My whole body was shaking. He didn't argue, he just ran out into the hallway, still holding the knife. I rushed to the door, slammed it shut, and locked it. I fumbled with my phone, trying to call his mom because my hands were actually shaking. When she answered, I could barely get the words out. I told her AJ came into my room with a knife while I was sleeping. There was a long silence on the other end. Then her voice changed completely. She sounded horrified, like she had been expecting something bad, but not this bad. She kept apologizing over and over, saying she was so sorry and that she believed me. I told her I couldn't stay there. I didn't care about the money or anything else. I just needed someone else to come watch him. She didn't argue at all. She said she would call her ex-husband and have him come right away. I stayed locked in that room for almost an hour, scared shitless. Eventually, there was a knock at the front door and a man's voice calling AJ's name. I cracked the guest room door and saw a man I recognized from a photo in the house. He went straight down the hall toward AJ's room without saying much to me. I grabbed my bag, walked past them without looking into AJ's room, and left the house as fast as I could. His mom sent me the money through Venmo later that night, along with another long apology, but I never went back there. I never even babysat for another family after that. I feel like I was actually close to becoming a news article online about a babysitter getting murdered by a child.
That's some shit. Story 3.
I was 21 when my sister asked me to watch her kids overnight while she and her husband went to a wedding a few hours away. I'd babysat my niece Emma and my nephew Lucas plenty of times before, so it wasn't a big deal. Emma was 6, quiet and sensitive, and Luke was 9, more talkative but still easy. They live in a normal suburban house in a quiet neighborhood not far from our childhood home. My sister walked me through the usual routine before they left, since this time I'd be staying overnight. Leftover Chinese food for dinner, and no scary shows, and bed by 9. She reminded me Emma sometimes got nervous at night and might call for me once or twice. After they left, the kids and I ate in the living room and watched a movie. It felt like a completely normal night. Around 9, I took them upstairs. Their bedrooms were across the hall from each other, with a bathroom in between. I tucked Emma in first. She asked if I'd leave her door open a little and keep the hallway light on. Lucas just rolled over and told me goodnight like he was already half asleep. I went downstairs and turned on the TV, keeping the volume low so they wouldn't hear. Around like 9:30 to 10, I heard footsteps upstairs. I figured Emma needed something. I started up the stairs, but before I got halfway, I saw her walking along the balcony toward the top step. She was standing there in her pajamas looking down at me. I asked what was wrong. She said I already came in her room and told her to go back to sleep, but she hadn't been able to. I stopped on the stairs and told her I hadn't been upstairs since I put them to bed. She thought I was joking at first. She said I stood in her doorway a few minutes ago and told her everything was fine in a whisper. I told her maybe she was dreaming it and walked her back to her room. I checked her closet and under the bed, even though I knew nothing would be there. She finally settled back in, but she kept watching me as I left, like she wasn't convinced. I went back downstairs, feeling slightly uneasy, but still telling myself kids mix dreams with reality all the time. About 20 minutes later, Lucas came down, rubbing his eyes. He asked why I came into his room. I felt a chill go through me. I told him I didn't. He said I stood by his dresser and looked at him, then walked out without saying anything. I tried to keep my voice calm and told him he must have been half asleep, but now this was weird, because both of them said pretty similar things. Instead of going back to bed, he stayed next to me on the couch now. That was when I started to really listen to the house. Every small sound felt louder. I turned the TV off, and the silence literally made my ears ring. Lucas noticed me doing this, and I think it started to scare him when I told him to shush for a second. I heard something upstairs. It was light footsteps running, and then I saw her running across the balcony upstairs, and then racing down the stairs, screaming Uncle Dan a bunch of times. When she got to the living room, I asked her what's wrong, and she started crying, saying there's someone upstairs. I think this was around the time my heart really started racing. They weren't playing a little kid prank on me. She was crying genuine tears. I asked her why she thought there's someone upstairs, and she responded saying someone came in her room again and said goodnight, but it didn't sound like me. I think by now, I was internally freaking the fuck out, but I told them to keep calm. I didn't want Emma to cause Lucas to start crying now too. I told them to wait down here. I'll go check upstairs and be right back. And that's exactly what I planned to do. But I wasn't going up there without a weapon at this point. I went to the kitchen, secretly grabbed a knife, and placed it in front of me as I walked back into the living room and then up the stairs. The kids were still on the couch. I made it to the upstairs balcony that overlooks the living room. I did a little march as I walked across it to try to make them laugh, but it didn't work. As I passed the balcony and into the upstairs foyer that led to the kids' bedrooms, I can't iterate enough just how much I wasn't expecting what happened next. I heard something in Emma's room. I peered inside and thought I saw something or someone. I quietly said hello so the kids wouldn't hear, but I wasn't expecting someone to respond. In a very weird, high-pitched voice, yet still sounding like a grown man, someone said, "Aren't they just so special?" The voice sounded like it belonged to someone with mental issues, maybe not fully there. I then realized what I was seeing in the bedroom was a really tall person standing next to Emma's bed now. I guess like 6'4", they looked to be like 6 inches taller than me. My heart was in my throat. I turned and ran down the stairs and grabbed the kids. I told them, "Put your shoes on now, we're leaving," and Emma started to cry even more. I quickly saw why. Peering around the wall up the balcony upstairs was this grotesque-looking man doing peekaboo with his hands toward the kids. I said forget the shoes and ran the kids outside with me in their socks. We ran to a house a couple doors down where I saw lights on inside, and I rang the bell 5 times. The lady who answered knew Lucas and Emma. I introduced myself and quickly explained the situation. She let us in immediately into safety. I got on the phone with 911 and stood on the front porch of this couple's house watching my sister's house. And as I saw that man casually strolling out of her house, walking down the walkway into the dark, know if he was armed or not. And based on his voice, I choose to believe it was some mentally handicapped person who simply walked right into the house. I stayed on the stoop watching the man until he disappeared down an intersecting street, and I told the operator which street it was. She kept making it seem like the cops would be heading down that direction, but it took so long for them to arrive that by then, that man was gone, possibly into one of the houses in the vicinity for all anyone would know. I wasn't happy with the response time, and I let the police know that. I went into my sister's house with them to investigate, and nothing seemed out of the sorts, nor was anyone else inside. Of course, given the circumstances, I drove the kids home to my parents' house with me that night to sleep there. We weren't going to sleep in that house that night regardless. And of course, there was somehow blame put on me that the one night I was watching them, someone breaks into the house. However, I firmly believe that man was in there before I even got there. I did not go needlessly unlocking doors or anything like that. Ever since then, my sister and my brother-in-law have been nuts with the security cameras. They have at least 6 all over the house, inside and out. But honestly, who can blame them after this?
Business needs. Get a quote at Byberg.com.
Byberg.
Neighbor horror stories, 3 of them. Neighbors, huh?
My name is Mike, and this happened last year when my fiancé and I bought our first starter home together. We're an Asian couple, which is relevant to the story. It was a small 2-story house in a basic suburban town in Georgia. There was nothing special about it, but to us, it was supposed to be special. It was a typical quiet street, decent backyard, cheap fence, and regular-looking houses lined up next to each other. We felt lucky to even buy a house at our age, so it was a very exciting point in our lives that was quite literally robbed from us, which you'll soon hear why. The first few days were normal. We unpacked, met a few neighbors, and tried to settle in. The neighbor on our right side was a friendly older couple. The neighbor across the street waved and came across to say hi when he saw us. But the house on our left side was different. We didn't see anyone come out of it for the first few days. The curtains were always shut. The house looked clean and normal, don't get me wrong, but it was always kind of dark inside, like no one was home, even though there was a car in the driveway. The only time we noticed anything was when we saw someone standing inside their front window one afternoon. My fiancée and I were carrying groceries in from the car when she whispered something to me about it. I looked over and saw a man standing behind the curtain, only half visible, but totally watching us. He didn't wave. As soon as he saw us glance at him, he walked away from the window. It was weird, but we didn't think too much about it. Some people are just quiet or awkward. Over the next week, we started noticing him more often. Not outside, but inside his house. I would catch him standing in his living room window sometimes when I left for work. My fiancée told me she saw him in the upstairs window once when she was getting the mail. Every time we noticed him, he seemed to be watching us, but never in a way where he stayed long. The second we looked back, he was gone. One night, something happened that made both of us uneasy in a way we couldn't ignore. Around midnight, I was getting ready for bed when I walked past our upstairs window. Our bedroom window faced directly toward his house. When I looked out of habit, I saw him in his upstairs window. This time he wasn't halfway hidden or standing behind a curtain. He was fully visible. He stood straight up with his face turned toward our bedroom window. I froze for a second because I wasn't sure if I was actually seeing it right, but the second he realized I saw him, he stepped back away from the window. I remember saying to my fiancée with a laugh, "Agreed, our neighbor's a creep." The next morning, the man came to our door. It was the first time we saw him outside. He knocked politely and introduced himself as Gordon. He apologized for looking like he was spying the night before. He told me he had been putting something on his window ledge and didn't mean to look into our room. He smiled the whole time, and it was a welcoming enough smile to give me a bit of relief. I'm not saying I loved the guy instantly. There was definitely something slightly off about him, but the apology was appreciated. I didn't want to be rude, so I told him it was fine. When I went back inside, I told my fiancé he seemed somewhat nice, but a little weird. We decided to forget about it. A week later, something else happened that we couldn't ignore. In the middle of the night, my fiancée shook me awake, telling me she heard someone in the yard. I was half asleep, but I got up to check the window. Gotta do what you gotta do as the man of the house. When I looked outside, unless it was f***ing Bigfoot, it was definitely a person. A full-grown man walking around like he was looking for something. My first reaction was to shout out, "Hey," even though I knew that wasn't the smartest thing to do. As soon as I yelled, the person walked fast toward the gate and slammed it shut behind him. Since we didn't have anything in the backyard yet besides some gardening tools, I didn't think someone was trying to steal anything, and I didn't bother to check the backyard. I did check the front windows, though, and didn't see anyone. I didn't go outside because I didn't feel safe, and eventually, my fiancé and I went back to sleep, even though we felt After that, the same thing happened again. My fiancé woke me up, telling me she heard rustling outside. This time we both heard it clearly. It sounded like someone was shimmying something. I can't say what, but best description I could give was some kind of lock. I went to the window again, and sure enough, I saw someone I felt my whole body tense up this time. I yelled that I was calling the cops. The person walked out of the yard and again slammed the gate the same way, but this time I saw enough of the man's face and posture to know it looked exactly like Gordon. I yelled Gordon, but he didn't respond. He just walked away like nothing happened. This time I went outside. I checked the yard, then the sides of the house. I took a deep breath and told myself I have to confront this now. I walked over to Gordon's house and knocked. He answered within seconds, which told me he was awake the whole time. He smiled like he always did, and started laughing while telling me that it was him in the yard. He said he was chasing away kids who always jumped the fences in the neighborhood, and he caught them jumping from his backyard into our backyard. He said it happens all the time and told me I'd get used to it. He kept smiling the whole time, but something about the smile didn't feel normal. It felt like something was behind it. I saw hate in his eyes, I swear. I didn't argue with him. I just told him I understood and went back home. But deep down, I didn't believe a word he said. The next day, he came over again and invited us to come to his house for Chinese food the next night, which would be a Friday. We felt like saying yes would at least clear the awkwardness between us, and we could just be cordial neighbors. We went to his house around 7 p.m. that Friday. The second we walked in, the atmosphere felt uncomfortable.
Want to go to Burger King?
Kids don't need much to feel like royalty, and right now,
The atmosphere felt uncomfortable. Gordon seemed relatively intoxicated and got only more drunk as he kept sipping more wine. He said he ordered a bunch of Chinese food and made a little weird comment like, "I know you guys love Chinese food," then laughed. He made little passive-aggressive comments here and there. Eventually the food arrived and he paid, and we offered to help him set up the table, but he almost yelled when he said no. The whole dinner felt tense. Then, as he finished more and more wine, he started acting more differently. He started making rude comments that were less passive and more direct. He said things that made it pretty clear he didn't like that an Asian couple moved into the neighborhood. At first, we tried ignoring it, hoping it would stop, but then he got louder and more angry. I mean it, he actually started getting himself angry as he talked about how this town had a history of being white. He started saying things that made both of us feel unsafe, honestly. Then he told us that it was in fact him going into our backyard those nights. He didn't deny it or try to hide it. The climax of the night was when he yelled at us that we were not welcome there and that the neighborhood... We didn't even talk about it until we were inside with the doors locked. We didn't know what to do except go to the other neighbors. So we walked door to door, asking them about Gordon. Some of them were shocked when we told them what happened. Others weren't surprised at all. A few people told us Gordon was a drunk whose wife left him years ago. It didn't make us feel any better because we were living next to him now. We tried to avoid him after that. We didn't look at his house, we didn't go outside unless we had to. But how long could you avoid your next door neighbor? Every night felt tense, like he could be watching us or trespassing again. Then, one night, a brick was thrown through our downstairs window. It shattered glass all over the living room. We both jumped out of bed when we heard it. When I ran downstairs, the brick was lying on the floor. No note attached or anything, just a brick. We knew it was Gordon. There was no one else it could have been, but we had no proof. We filed a police report. The police came to talk to him, but he denied everything. He acted confused and told them he had nothing to do with it. The police couldn't do anything except document the incident. We talked about putting up cameras and staying to fight it out, but honestly, we were too scared, and this was mentally exhausting already. We both felt like something worse would happen if we stayed. Not even 2 months after moving in, we started packing again. We couldn't live next to someone who hated us and had already gone into our yard at night and then thrown a brick at our house. Before we left, we filed another report explaining everything. The police said they would keep an eye on the situation, but we didn't feel protected. We moved out of that house and out of that neighborhood as fast as we could. We left behind the home we thought would be our first chapter in life together. I still think if we stayed there, you'd have eventually heard of my fiancé and I on the news having been murdered by this man. I wish it wasn't illegal to dox people. Boy, would I love to drop his address in this story. All we can do now is move on and upward from here. This story happened a couple of years ago, around late 2021. My name is Noah, and me and my fiancée Gabby, who is now my wife, had moved into a new house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was a nice 2-story house, perfect for our future family. The neighbors seemed friendly and welcoming as well. Most notably, the neighbors that lived to the right of us seemed the friendliest. It was a couple in their late 30s, but I wasn't really sure. The husband's name was Daniel, and his wife was named Veronica. They were very friendly and seemed like sweet people. They even baked us a red velvet cake as a little welcoming gift. The cake was really good, and we couldn't thank them enough for it. The first couple of weeks were good in the new neighborhood. It was quiet and peaceful, until we started noticing strange things with our neighbors, Daniel and Veronica. One night, around 11 p.m., I heard shouting coming from outside. I looked out my bedroom window and realized it was coming from their house, like they were arguing. I couldn't see them because the angle of the houses blocked my view. Eventually, I saw Veronica storm out to her car and leave. After that, it was quiet again. I told Gabby about it, and we just chalked it up to them getting into an argument and Veronica leaving to cool off. I was kind of concerned because they seemed like such sweet people, not the type to have heated arguments. But every couple has disagreements. We didn't think too much of it. Later on that same week, Gabby and I were coming back home. When we got out of the car, we heard yelling coming from inside their house again. They had their main door open, but the storm door was closed, so we could hear them arguing clearly. Again, it wasn't our business, so we ignored it. Then one day, I noticed Veronica's car wasn't there for a few days, but I assumed maybe she was on vacation. Daniel was still there because his car stayed parked, and I would see him go out once in a while. But then it became a week, then 2 weeks, and Veronica's car was still gone. My wife noticed too and thought maybe they got divorced or something, which would make sense due to their constant arguing. But the way she left was so sudden. One day her car was there, the next it was gone. and Daniel was acting weird. Every time we saw him, he would try to avoid us. He wouldn't wave like neighbors usually do, and the rare times I talked to him, he would talk fast and try to end the conversation as soon as possible, like he was nervous. Something was definitely up with him. After 3 weeks of Veronica being gone, I decided to go over and ask Daniel how things were. My fiancé argued against it, saying it wasn't our business and to leave it alone. But curiosity got the best of me, and I knew she was curious too, so I rang his doorbell. I knew he was home because his car was there. It took him almost 3 minutes to answer, and when he did, he looked off. He was sweating like he just ran a marathon, and he had this weird forced smile like he was hiding something. I asked him about Veronica and why I haven't seen her or her car in a while. He hesitated and said, she just went to go stay with her mom for a while out of state because she's very sick and she's looking after her. I felt like that was a lie, but I didn't question it. I might have believed him if he wasn't acting so strange. I then asked why he was sweating so much, and he said he was doing workouts upstairs. He was speaking really fast, like he was rushed or nervous, but then something happened that made my heart drop. I heard a voice scream from somewhere inside the house. I wasn't exactly sure where, but I was almost positive it was a woman's voice yelling for help. I asked what that was, and Daniel quickly said, I'm playing a movie upstairs and forgot to pause it. That made no sense since he had just said he was working out upstairs. I just said okay and told him I would catch him later. I went back home and told Gabby everything. She was just as concerned as me and told me to call the cops. I did, and I requested to stay anonymous, even though Daniel would probably know it was me. I told the dispatcher that I heard something in my neighbor's house and wanted them to do a welfare check. Eventually, an officer pulled up. About 10 minutes later, I heard sirens and saw 5 police cars and an ambulance. Me and Gabby rushed outside. Officers were everywhere. Daniel was being taken away in handcuffs while Veronica was being rushed to the ambulance on a stretcher. We later found out Daniel and Veronica had been in an abusive relationship and things had escalated badly. Daniel kept her locked in the basement for weeks. I didn't even know they had a basement. Down there, he would assault her, rape her, abuse her, and do horrible things. He even sold her car to make it look like she wasn't home. When I heard that scream while talking to him, it turned out he stabbed her 5 times because she had made noise when he told her to be quiet while he answered the door. That explained why he was acting so strange. Unfortunately, Veronica didn't survive and passed a couple hours later. As Daniel was being escorted into a police car, he said, "I know it was you who snitched on me, and you'll regret this." I wanted to laugh it off if the situation wasn't so messed up, knowing he would be behind bars for a long time.
Look at that. That's hungry.
When you need to pull over. After a day of pulling over, there's a Wyndham. Where there's a Wyndham, there's a way.
The population of Philadelphia is about 2 million people. That makes it the 6th largest city in the U.S. Did you know?
No.
Knowing he would be behind bars for a long time. It's crazy how you never know who people truly are behind closed doors. Daniel seemed like a friendly, normal guy, and so did Veronica. They seemed like a great couple, but obviously they had serious issues hidden underneath. Fast forward a couple nights after the incident, I woke up in the middle of the night. It was dark, and I saw the silhouette of a person. As my eyes adjusted, I saw that it was Daniel. My heart dropped. He said, "I told you you would regret this." He was holding a knife. I tried talking him down, telling him to calm down and just talk, but he didn't respond. I pressed myself against the headboard. Then, out of nowhere, he lunged at me. I screamed, and then I woke up for real. I was breathing heavily, and Gabby was beside me. She asked what was wrong, and I said it was just a bad dream. She went back to sleep, but I couldn't. The fact that I dreamed about my neighbor who murdered his wife breaking into my house to kill me chills me to this day. Most dreams fade, but this one stayed vivid, and the words he said in the dream were the exact same ones he said while being taken away in cuffs. I never told my wife about this dream. I don't know why. I guess because she might think I'm crazy or it would just stress her out. Eventually, after we got married, we moved to another part of town. It's a nice, quiet neighborhood and a great house, but the whole event traumatized us. Knowing we live next to a murderer still haunts us. The left side, and some man rented the right side. I never met him. I never even saw him. The landlord said he kept to himself and worked nights, so it didn't concern me. My bedroom was on the second floor, and the wall of my bedroom was the same wall as the neighbor's bedroom. If I pressed my ear up to the wall, I could hear faint movements on the other side sometimes, but that's to be expected in New York City. The first week that I lived there, nothing strange happened. I worked long hours, came home tired, ate something simple, and went straight to bed. I was just happy to have my own place. And then one night, things began pitched, like someone trying to talk in a fake voice. It was faint, and it was being spoken from the other room, but the wall was so thin that it felt like the person was standing right next to me. I couldn't understand what he was saying. It was just this weird, high voice mumbling. I tried to ignore it. Maybe he was on the phone, or maybe he was watching something on TV. Eventually, the mumbling stopped and I fell asleep. A few nights later, though, the mumbling came back. But this time it was louder, and this time it was definitely a man talking. I pressed my ear lightly to the wall and listened. It didn't sound like he was on the phone. It sounded like he was talking to himself. I didn't know whether to laugh or be slightly creeped out. To block the noise out, I put the blanket over my head. I had work early the next morning and I needed sleep. I think that was the first night I realized I did not like living there alone. 2 weeks after that, the knocks started. I was lying in bed again, half asleep, when I heard 2 taps on the wall right next to my head. It was so close that I flinched like someone was touching me. I sat up and waited a few moments in silence. And then, there were 2 more identical taps on the wall from the other side. I knew for sure that it was not a house settling noise that could just easily be explained away. I rolled away from the wall and sat there shaking. I kept waiting to hear something else, but it went quiet. I wanted to knock back, but I realized that acknowledging it would likely make it worse. The next morning, I told myself it was not a big deal and that I was overreacting. Over the next week, the knocks continued. Sometimes soft, sometimes harder, always at night, and always when I was trying to sleep. One night it went on for so long that I put in headphones and turned on a loud fan. I remember lying awake thinking about how thin the wall was, how close his room was, how close he was. He could literally be lying just 2 feet away from me. It scared me more every night. But still, the knocks could have just been him sitting against the wall and accidentally banging or tapping the wall with something. But then came the night that everything changed. I'll never forget it. I was lying in bed on my side, facing the wall. My eyes were closed, but I was not asleep yet. The room was dark, except for my street lamp shining through the blinds. I heard the knocks again. 3 slow ones. I kept my eyes closed and tried not to react. Then I heard that same high-pitched man's voice come through. My lungs locked up.
Fuck, no.
I sat straight up in bed, shaking so hard I felt my teeth chattering. This was no longer just potential accidental taps on the wall. He was now acknowledging me directly. He said it straight through the wall. I could just tell he said it like he knew I was right next to him. I grabbed my phone and called my boyfriend. I whispered to him that I was scared out of my mind and told him exactly what happened. He told me he was coming over right away and he would stay the night with me. I stayed sitting up with the lights on until he arrived. The rest of the night, nothing happened. It was almost worse that way. It made me feel crazy, like the neighbor knew my boyfriend was there. For a few days, things were quiet. I started thinking maybe it was just some weird coincidence that the neighbor was doing something and I misheard. But then a few nights later, something happened that made me leave the house running. I still have bad dreams about it. I was asleep this time, fully asleep. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but I woke up fast. Something snapped me awake. I sat up slightly, and then it started. The knocks on the wall, like someone drumming their fingers right beside my head. I screamed back without thinking. I shouted for whoever it was to leave me alone. I was shaking and breathing hard. I think mustering up the courage to finally yell back spiked my adrenaline. I don't know exactly what I expected next, but I will tell you, what did happen next, I never expected in a million years. There was a voice. It came from inside my room. A voice in the dark said, "Go to sleep." It was not the voice from the wall. It was deeper, closer, right there in my room. I launched off my bed screaming. For some reason, the brief moments of my running through the hallway and down the stairs was a blur, because I really just remember getting outside and running into the street screaming for help over and over. I must have looked insane. I ran barefoot onto the sidewalk. I kept looking behind me, expecting someone to be chasing me. I didn't stop screaming until a man 2 houses down came outside and stared at me like he didn't know what to do. I begged him to let me use his phone to call my boyfriend, but he said by the sound of it, I needed to call the police. So I called the police instead. I waited by that man's sidewalk, shaking and crying until the police arrived. When they showed up, I told them everything that happened. They asked me if I was sure that someone was in the house, and I said yes, 100% yes. They drove me back to my duplex, and 2 officers went inside. My front door was still wide open like I left it. They said there were no signs of forced entry. They asked me if I remembered unlocking the door as I ran out. I had no memory of touching the lock. I told them I didn't think I unlocked it, but I was so panicked that maybe I did. I couldn't be sure. They checked every room, every closet, under the bed, everywhere. No one was in the house. They knocked on the neighbor's door too, but he wouldn't open up. It looked like he wasn't home at all. Eventually, my boyfriend showed up and took me back to his place. I was still shaking hours later. I don't remember sleeping again the rest of the night. In the morning, I called my landlord and told him everything. I told him I needed to know who the neighbor was and if he had any history of problems or strange behavior. I also told him I wanted to break the lease immediately. At first, he pushed back. He said he needed notice and paperwork. I told him I would not step foot in that duplex alone again, and he needed to help me. It took a whole day of phone calls before he said he would let me break the lease. My boyfriend came with me every single time I went back to the duplex to move my stuff. I refused to go alone. During those days, we tried knocking on the neighbor's door multiple times, but he never answered. It was like no one lived there. But there were signs that someone did, like packages at the door and a car in the driveway, but no human response. I ended up moving back in with my parents for a while until I found a new place. I still don't know if that neighbor was actually in my room that night, or if someone got in without the police noticing, or if it was just all in my head from the stress. But that one's the least likely explanation because it's pretty clear what's real and what's in your head. My landlord told me later that the neighboring tenant eventually moved out too without saying a word. I don't know what really happened in that duplex.
I was made to drink milk from a wolf's udder because the pack said I was a curse. I was born clutching my dead twin's throat. They
Four very scary true night shift horror stories. That's what we're watching next. Scary. Let her sit in the couch and stop calling her names. Yeah.
My name is Thomas.
Who call me
I've
names?
been working the late shift at our local Burger King for about 2 years now. It's not
We're not
glamorous,
calling
but
names,
it pays
that's
rent
fine.
and the hours work for me. I'm a night owl anyway, so being behind the drive-thru window from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. doesn't bother me the way it would most people. This all started maybe a month
Wow.
ago. I was
Don't
working
be
the drive-thru
mean.
solo. We're usually understaffed after midnight, and that's when a car pulled up to the speaker. Male voice, pretty unremarkable. He ordered a large double Whopper with cheese meal with a Coke. It was pretty standard. The one notable thing about the encounter was when he went to pay, he only rolled the window down just enough to slide his card through, and his windows were tinted so I couldn't see his face. He paid and I handed him his receipt, but then he just drove off, like without stopping at the second window to grab his food. I waited there with his bag for a few minutes, wondering if he'd be coming back. Eventually, I just set the order aside and ended up eating it later. People do weird stuff sometimes, so I didn't think about it too much. About a week later, it happened again. It was the same order and the same exact thing happened. Someone paid at the first window
I need a
and then
reason
drove
to
off before
smile.
picking up the food. I remember thinking, that's strange. Someone did the exact same thing last week. But I wasn't quite able to connect the dots at that point. I just figured it was a coincidence. It wasn't until it happened a third time that I realized it was the same person making these orders. At that point, I knew something weird was going on, but I wasn't going to complain. The food was made, paid for, and I was the one who got to enjoy it. So I kept eating the free Whopper meals and tried not to think too hard about why some random dude was essentially buying me dinner every few days. This went on for a few more weeks. The guy would show up every 4 or 5 days, always late, usually between 1 and 3 a.m., and always with the same order.
Be safe out there.
I started to almost look forward to it in a weird way. Like, oh, it's been a few days. Wonder if my mysterious benefactor is going to show up tonight. One night, I was working the speaker at around 2 a.m. when I heard that familiar voice through the speaker. I knew what was about to happen, and I was right. He ordered the same meal, which I knew I'd be eating. But this time, he said something else. Something that made me freeze up. He said, and I'll never forget this, "I hope you've been enjoying those Whoppers, Mr. Hurley." My last name is Hurley. I don't wear a name tag with my last name on it. It's not posted anywhere customers can see. There's no reason at all that this guy should know my last name. I just stood there for a second, not saying anything. My brain couldn't catch up. Then I started talking into the speaker, asking who this was, what he wanted, and how he knew my name. I must have said, "Who is this?" 4 or 5 times, but he never answered. And this time, he didn't even pull up to pay. I heard his engine rev, and then he was gone. I was rattled for the rest of my shift. There was nothing I could do, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. Little did I know, things were about to get much worse. When I got home after my shift, I found a note on my doorstep. It was a handwritten note that said, "I know what you did. You have 3 days." I just stood there staring at it with my hands shaking, and I started feeling really, really sick, like someone had punched me in the gut. I have no idea what I supposedly did.
Yeah.
I've been racking my brain trying to think of anything that could explain this, but I've got nothing. This sounds so stupid, but I don't have enemies or secrets. I'm a 24-year-old guy that works at Burger King and plays video games on his days off. I'm not exactly living the most exciting life. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I just sat on my couch with the lights on, dreading whatever was going to happen next. But nothing happened. I had no choice but to just move on. It turned out I wouldn't have to wait that long, because the next night at work, that guy was back. This time, he didn't even bother playing games. Instead of ordering food, he just asked me to write something down. Then, before I could even respond, he gave me an address. It was some random place on the outskirts of town, in an area I didn't recognize. And then he told me I had 2 days to deliver him $10,000. I damn near laughed at that. I didn't think he was serious, but he clearly wasn't kidding. As soon as he drove off, I immediately went back to being terrified. There was absolutely no way I'd be giving that guy $10,000. I didn't even have $10,000. I still don't. So I decided to ignore it. I figured it had to be some elaborate scam or prank from someone I knew. I should have called the police right then, but I didn't even think of that. 3 nights later, I thought things were over. I hadn't dropped any money off, and nothing had happened. But of course, I was wrong. I was sitting there watching TV, winding down from my shift, when out of nowhere, I was jolted up by the sound of shattering glass. I hit the floor on instinct, thinking someone was shooting at me. But when I finally got up and looked around, I realized someone had just thrown a rock through my window. By the time I went to look outside, whoever had been there was long gone. This time, I called the police. I told them everything, including the address I had been given, and they said they'd check it out and told me to stay vigilant. They really didn't do much. They just told me they'd patrol the area a little more closely, and that without any doorstep footage, which I obviously don't have, there was nothing they could do. And that was 3 days ago. I've called in sick to work the last 3 nights, but I don't even think that's going to do anything since the guy clearly knows where I live. I can't afford to not work, and I can't afford to move, so I'm stuck in this nightmare until the police can track that person down. I think I might try getting them to the credit card number that the guy used to pay for the Whopper meals, but other than that, I'm not really sure what to do. Why I got targeted, I have no idea. Hopefully things don't escalate from here.
On the field, these linemen are my
That's
defense
it?
from anything coming to hurt me.
That's it? That's the story?
Targeted, I have no idea. Hopefully things don't escalate from here.
Story number 2 by RJ. My friend's name is RJ.
I graduated from college about 8 months ago with a degree in communications, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, has been incredibly useful in helping me secure gainful employment. That's sarcasm, by the way. I'm still living with my parents, and I haven't been able to find a real job yet, so I'm off to a great start. In the meantime, I drive for Uber and Uber Eats, sometimes both in the same night, depending on what's popping. It's not a career, but it's money, and it lets me feel like I'm doing something productive while I figure my life out. I know that sounds kind of pathetic, but it's what I've got right now. I drive mostly on weekend nights, Friday and Saturday, usually from around 9 p.m. until 2 or 3 in the morning. That's when the surge pricing kicks in and the drunk college kids need rides home from the bars downtown. It's not technically a night shift, but it feels like one. This happened a few weeks ago. It was a Saturday night, maybe around 1:30, and I was about ready to call it. I was about to turn off the app when one more request came through. The pickup was downtown, which was fine, but the drop-off location was really far away, past the suburbs even. I almost declined it for that reason, but the fare was too good. The girl I picked up was completely normal. The drive took about 40 minutes. By the time I dropped her off, it was past 2. And then I was alone, out in the middle of absolutely nowhere with a 40-minute drive back to civilization. I turned the car around and started heading home. Not 10 minutes into the drive, I saw a car stopped in the middle of the road with its hazards on. I approached cautiously, and I realized there were 2 people standing in front of the car, waving their arms like they were trying to flag me down. My first instinct was actually not to stop, but I'm someone who can't just ignore a person in need. So against my better judgment, I decided to stop. I stopped the car about 20 feet away from them and rolled my window down a few inches. Just enough to hear them, but not enough for someone to reach inside. It was a middle-aged couple, which actually put me at ease a little. That is, until they started talking. The woman did most of the talking. She had this frantic energy about her, but also something that felt slightly rehearsed, like she'd given the speech before. She said they were warning drivers about a collapsed bridge ahead. She went on to say it happened earlier that day, and they'd almost driven right over themselves. She pointed down the road into the darkness, and said if I kept going that way, I'd end up in the river. So naturally, I asked them what I should do instead. The husband spoke of a turnoff that was about halfway between where we were and the bridge. He said it cut through the woods and that it would add some time to my drive, but it would get me back to the main highway without having to deal with the bridge. I thanked them and started driving. Something felt off. I didn't know what it was, but I knew one thing. I was gonna trust my gut and just drive the way I had been intending to go. About a mile down the road, I saw the turnoff they'd been talking about. It was this narrow dirt path that disappeared into the trees, and it was barely wide enough for one car. I decided to keep driving, and a few minutes later, I reached the bridge. I slowed down a little, but it was fine. It wasn't collapsed for sure, and it didn't even look damaged at all. I drove across it without any issues and made it back to the main highway a few minutes later. Even though nothing happened, the experience stuck with me to the point where I didn't sleep well that night. I kept thinking about what would have happened if I'd followed that couple's instructions. If I turned down that dirt road, alone in the middle of the night. A few days later, the curiosity got the better of me, and I did something stupid. I drove back out there. It was the middle of the afternoon this time, broad daylight, which made me feel slightly less insane about the whole thing. I retraced my route from that night. Those people weren't there this time, obviously. When I got to the turnoff, that dirt path into the woods, I slowed down and pulled over. To my surprise, there was something new. There was a sign nailed to a tree right at the entrance of the path that simply said, "Dead End." That sign hadn't been there before. I would have definitely noticed it that night, even in the dark. Someone had put it up in the last few days. I sat in my car for a minute, staring at the path. In the daylight, it didn't look quite as ominous. It was just a narrow dirt road that disappeared into some dense trees. I wanted to explore it a little, but I was worried about my car getting stuck. so I decided to go it on foot. I'm not sure what I was expecting to find, but being that there was daylight out, I really wasn't scared at all. I turned off my engine. As soon as I stepped out of the car, though, I got a bad feeling. I stood there at the edge of the path, trying to see further down, but there wasn't much to see, really. I don't know what it was, but something about standing there and actually being out in the open discouraged me from walking in. Things went from 0 to 100 in about 2 seconds. As I was turning around and walking back to my car, I heard a scream ring out behind me. It was this awful scream, definitely a woman's, and it came from somewhere deep in the woods down the path. I can't tell you how fast I was out of there. Before I could even think, I was already speeding away. I don't think I've ever been so scared before, and that was about 2 weeks ago. I haven't been back to that spot since, but here's the thing. I can't stop thinking about it. Part of me knows I should just leave it alone, but I've been thinking about asking one of my friends to come out there with me. If I do, I'll record a video and send it, but for now, all I can really do is wonder about that scream and those people.
So I think one of the things that is important to point out is that your origin story
Nobody cares.
and my origin
Oprah. Yeah.
This happened a few winters ago when I was working overnight security for a commercial warehouse complex. I was 26 and had been doing the job for 8 months. The shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and I was always the only employee on the site. There was a supervisor I could call if something went wrong, but for the most part, it was just me and the cameras. The complex was in an industrial area on the edge of a small city that didn't have much nightlife. Most nights followed the same routine. Clock in, do a walkthrough of the exterior, then settle into the security office to monitor the cameras. And every hour, another patrol. The warehouse stored mostly industrial equipment and bulk supplies, nothing particularly valuable. The night everything went sideways started pretty normally. It was cold enough for there to be snow falling, but nothing too heavy. I did my first patrol, everything was secure, and I went back to the office. Around 1:30 a.m., I got a motion alert on one of the loading dock cameras. This wasn't unusual. The system was sensitive, and wind or animals could trigger it. I pulled up the feed and watched for a minute, but everything looked normal. Just the empty dock and snow drifting past the floodlights. But the alerts kept coming. Every 10 or 15 minutes, the same camera would trigger. Each time I checked the feed, and each time I'd see nothing. What started to bother me was that the movement always seemed to happen just at the edge of the frame, like something was there but not quite in view. By 2:30, I had maybe 6 or 7 alerts from the same camera. No other cameras were triggering, just that one. At 3 a.m., I went outside to check it myself. The snow had mostly stopped, and the complex was dead silent. I walked the full perimeter of the dock area with my flashlight. I didn't see anything unusual. All the bay doors were closed and locked, and there were no footprints in the snow except for mine. I went back inside. About 20 minutes later, I heard a loud, metallic scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across concrete. It came from inside the warehouse, somewhere deep in the building. I checked the interior cameras, but all 6 feeds showed empty aisles. I was starting to freak out a little bit because I started feeling like I was being toyed with or watched somehow. But still, I explained the noise away by chalking it up to the wind or something. An hour later, though, I heard it again. It was louder this time. The dragging sound, followed by a sharp bang, like something had struck one of the interior doors. I cycled through the cameras again. Nothing on 1 through 5. When I got to camera 6, though, the feed was black. Maybe 3 seconds of static, and then it came back. But something was different. The angle had shifted, just a few degrees to the left, like someone had bumped the camera or adjusted its position. At that point, I had no choice. I grabbed my flashlight and radio and headed into the warehouse. The interior was massive, probably 80,000 square feet of industrial shelving arranged in long aisles. During the day, it was bright and full of forklifts. At night, the overhead lights were dimmed to save power, casting everything in this yellowish half light. I was maybe halfway down the main aisle when I heard footsteps coming from somewhere to my left. It definitely sounded like someone, a person walking maybe 2 or 3 aisles over. As soon as I stopped, the footsteps stopped too. I stood there trying to control my breathing. I remember how tense it was, standing there in complete silence, waiting for a sound that I wasn't even sure would come. After what felt like forever, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to break the silence. In a firm voice, I announced my presence as security and insisted that whoever was there make things easy and reveal themselves. But of course, there was no response. The rest of that patrol was utterly terrifying. I was bracing myself for a fight or some kind of confrontation, and the longer I surveyed without finding anyone, the worse that feeling got. But I ultimately finished my patrol without seeing another person, which was arguably worse because I knew with 100% certainty that there was someone in there. I didn't see or hear anything for the rest of my shift, but that didn't make me feel any better. I actually felt somewhat guilty. My job was laughably simple, and I was messing it up in real time. But by the time 7 rolled around, I wanted nothing more than to just get out of there. I reported everything to my supervisor when he showed up on site. Maintenance did a full inspection, but didn't find anything either. Even after everything was double and triple checked, no one was able to identify the method of entry, and I could tell people didn't believe my story. Still though, that night remains one of the freakiest things that has ever happened to me.
That's it.
QuickMD connects patients with a doctor online for